The paradox of this moment is simple. Western leaders speak loudly, but logistics whisper. Military aid to Ukraine has fallen sharply over the summer, even after NATO stood up to the prioritized Ukraine requirements list, which buys from US stockpiles with European money. The Kiel Institute's tracker shows a 43% drop in July and August compared with the first half of 2025. Financial and humanitarian lines held up, but the kit that wins battles has sagged, and that gap between pledges and pallets shapes everything that follows. Washington's posture has shifted from writing checks to brokering purchases, and the Pentagon is pressing allies to fund more deliveries under Pearl, with about $2 billion pledged so far, still below Kiev's near-term target. That is the new reality of burden sharing, and it limits the leverage any US president has over the tempo of resupply. Yet even in the middle of this shortfall, the United States has been a force multiplier in a different way. Multiple reports confirm US intelligence and targeting data have enabled Ukraine's long-range strikes on Russian energy infrastructure. These refinery and logistics hits are precisely the sort of pain Moscow cannot ignore because they touch revenue, repair capacity, and public narratives of control. In other words, the West can squeeze without shipping a single extra launcher. The headline question this week is whether the White House will green light Tomahawk cruise missiles for Ukraine, and there are two realities here. First, the political signalling value is high, and the Kremlin knows it. Second, the practical challenges are not trivial. Ukraine would need appropriate launch systems and training, and the US Navy is rebuilding its own inventories. It's a live option, but not an overnight lever. Europe, for its part, is trying to turn promises into action. Berlin has just committed more than €2 billion, including Patriot interceptors, Iris-T air defense, radar, precision artillery, and rocket ammunition. That helps plug urgent gaps, but it will not by itself reverse the summer dip unless others follow quickly and at scale. The United Kingdom has leaned into drones, promising a tenfold jump to 100,000 units alongside a broader push into autonomous systems. That matters because small, smart, numerous platforms have been the decisive marginal tool of 2025. But again, pledges have a clock on them. Moscow calculates on delivery delays. Now, to the counter moves. If Trump is tempted to be tougher on Russia than after his Gaza diplomacy, Putin is signaling he will answer step for step. The clearest marker is legal. Moscow has moved to allow the deployment of reservists abroad in peacetime without a formal declaration of war or a mass mobilization. On its own, that doesn't produce trained brigades. In a crisis, though, it lets the Kremlin surge manpower with fewer political breaks. It is a threat in readiness rather than a capability in hand. There's also the grey zone pressure. NATO capitals have faced a run of Russian airspace violations and drone incidents. The alliance stood up Eastern Sentry air defence operations and is tightening rules of engagement while the EU debates a continent-wide drone war. The strategic message is that Moscow can generate nuisance and cost at will, and the counter message is that Allied reactions are getting faster and more coherent. So, where does this leave the balance of threat to Putin if Western help remains patchy in delivery? 3 points. First, Ukraine has found a way to hurt Russia deep in its rear without waiting for every Western package to arrive. The refinery strikes, rail junction hits, and long-range drone raids disrupt fuel flows, raise insurance and repair costs, and puncture the story of invulnerability. They are asymmetric and iterative, and they exploit precisely the sort of intelligence backing Washington is willing to provide even when hardware is slow. That keeps constant pressure on the Kremlin's domestic promise of normal life. Secondly, the threat of escalation is now mostly legal and procedural on the Russian side and mostly industrial on the Western side. Putin's new reservist framework is about removing hurdles so he can scale manpower if required. The West's hurdle is real action, munitions lines, air defense interceptors, training bandwidth and transport. The summer dip tells the Kremlin that time may still be his ally. But Germany's fresh package and NATO's Pearl, some tell the tap has not been turned off. That uncertainty constrains. The third point is that signalling matters. Tomahawks, even a discussion item, shift Moscow's risk calculus because they imply deeper strikes on higher value energy nodes. NATO's quick responses to incursions signal fewer seams to probe, and every publicized refinery hit tells a regional group of elites that the cost of this war can rise without warning. It's not decisive by itself, but it narrows Putin's room to intimidate Europe into backing away. So what should we watch for in the next month? Aid velocity, not just volume. If Pearl purchases and German contracts convert into delivered interceptors, rockets and spare parts before winter peaks, Ukraine rides out the grid attacks with fewer blackouts and keeps air defense morale high. If not, Russia buys time for cruise and glide bomb salvos. Whether the Tomahawk's talks turn into specific funded launch platform ready plans, that's another question that needs to be answered. Get rid of that, and this remains signalling rather than strategy. If national caveats ease, an aircraft can be redeployed fluidly across Eastern Century missions, then Moscow's drone theatrics again will start to yield diminishing returns. A quick uptick in reservist call-ups in Moscow or extended training assemblies will be the tell that the legal change is being operationalized by Putin. The bottom line is that both leaders, both Putin and Trump, are posturing but not equally. Trump can rattle markets and headlines, yet his leverage on Russia is indirect and his leverage on allies is financial. Putin can make legal challenges and legal changes but overnight and stage provocations tomorrow, but converting these moves into battlefield outcomes still requires trained troops, ammunition and a defense industrial base already stretched by Ukrainian strikes and sanctions. That is why refinery maps keep catching fire. There is little appetite for a direct US-Russian clash, and war by accident is still the greater risk. The real contest is over stamina and tempo. If the West closes the gap between the politics of promises and delivered hardware while maintaining the quiet enabling of deeper strikes, the Kremlin's room for coercion shrinks. If the summer dip becomes a winter habit, Putin will read it as a permission slip to push harder, especially with fresh legal cover, to deploy more bodies. The next 8 weeks will tell us which story is true. But, promises bruise reputations, deliveries break things. And right now the West is bruising, Ukraine is still breaking, and Putin is watching to see which one wins.